Okay, welcome back everyone. We're going to kick off the new year by learning how to draw human eyes as part of our portrait that we're doing in class. So we're going to break it down into two sessions. The first session we're going to cover the eyeball itself, and on the second session we'll take a look at how to add the features such as tear ducts and lids and eyebrows, etc. So hang tight and we'll get started. Okay, so I've made up this little mock-up of an eyeball to kind of break it down a little bit. Hopefully this will make it easier for you guys to understand. So first thing we have to realize is that the eyeball itself is a sphere. Okay, it's a three-dimensional ball and it's relatively large. Okay, the reason that I say that is because when you start shading this, you have to think of it as a three-dimensional form and you have to shade it accordingly or paint it accordingly depending on what your project is. The iris, which is the color part of the eye, needs to be about half the size as the entire sphere. So one of the common mistakes that I see students make all the time is they make the iris too small. So you got to make it approximately half the size of the entire sphere. The pupil has to be directly in the center of the iris, and that varies in size depending on whether it's dilated or how much is dilated. And then the little catch light, which is just a reflection of the light that's hitting the eye, that can vary as well depending on the direction of the light and the intensity of the light. Okay. When we look at the eyeball from a front view or a side view like this, notice that the overall eyeball remains a sphere. However, because of perspective, the iris and the pupil now look more like an oval. Okay, so we have to change it if we are doing a profile. And if you are doing what's called three-quarter view, then it's kind of somewhere between the two, depending on the angle that you're looking at. So the iris is not going to be a circle. It's going to be an oval, but it's going to be wider than if I were to put it directly to the side like so. Okay, so those are things that we want to keep in mind as we are drawing our eyes. Also, there's one area that's missing because I didn't have something to make it with. There's a cornea that comes out. It's a clear piece, kind of like a big contact lens that would come over the entire iris. Okay, from a front view you won't really see it, so we're going to start with that view. Okay, so let me switch over and then we'll start the drawing part. So what I've done here for you guys in class is I've given you a diagram of the eyeball, and we've also given you some circles here so you can get a little practice in. Later on you want to be able to do this without using any like mechanical means to make circles like I did here with in Photoshop. So the first part is just practice shading. Okay, remember that a sphere is just a three-dimensional circle. So what we want to do is we want to establish the direction of the light source and start shading it accordingly. So in the example up here, we can see that the light has to be coming from this direction because you can see the catch light here and we can see some shadows on the underside. Okay, the pupil, that's the hole that's in the eye, that's going to be the darkest part. So we're going to make that pure black, as dark as you can get it, because that's just a hole that goes in. Okay, and then the iris, you just have to look at the direction, whether you have a dark color eye like brown eyes or blue eyes. So the big thing here is that when you are shading, you want to create these little patterns and everything points towards the center. So I like to think of it as bicycle spokes. And the catch light, which is a reflection from the cornea, that's going to be the brightest part of the drawing. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start this process and show you what it looks like when it's done. So I'm going to start by shading this in, and it's not a really deep dark shadow. Okay, yes, the eyeball is relatively light, but it is not pure white. So I'm using a mechanical pencil here, and then I can use a blending stump to shade it all in or to fade it. There's going to be a little bit of shadow here, but not too much. Okay. So this is a blending stump. All of this is just rolled up paper. You can make these yourself or purchase them. If you don't have one handy, you can just use like a little tissue. Just anything to make it soft. The reason that I like using these when I'm working with the pencil is because it keeps the oil from my hands getting on the paper, and then if I need to erase, it makes it a lot easier to erase. Once you get that oil mixing in with the graphite, it makes it a little bit harder to erase. So all I'm doing here is I'm softening up that shadow, and notice that I'm fading it towards the center, right? So this area here needs to be light, and then as the sphere goes into the skull, it gets a little bit darker depending on where the light source is coming from. And there we go. For the pupil, that's going to be nice and dark, so I'm just going to go ahead and really get in here nice and dark. I am going to stay away from the catch light for now. Normally I would draw all of this in pencil so that I wouldn't have any little lines here, but since I printed these out, those lines are going to be there. Okay. When I start doing the iris, I'm going to first start. An easy way of doing it is you can actually subdivide this into, think of it like a pizza pie. Everybody loves pizza. And that just reminds you that everything is going to go towards the center. And don't be afraid to spin your paper. Now remember, this is wet. Your eyes are very wet. So some of this is going to look lighter than others depending on how the light is hitting it. So like here, for example, I'm going to try to stay away from that catch light. And all I'm doing is creating a radiating pattern towards the center. Depending on the color of the eyes, the patterns will either be really noticeable or may not be that noticeable at all. So later on, when we're practicing drawing eyeballs, we're going to be looking at some real photographs so that you guys can actually see how each eye is separate or individual. Then on the outer edge of the iris, in most eyes, actually in all eyes, there's like this darkish area here. Again, on some eyes is really noticeable, like if you have green eyes or blue eyes, you're going to notice this a lot more than if you had, say, brown eyes. But it's there. So you want to try to kind of get that. And then when you're doing this, just keep the paper flowing. You want this to look relatively smooth, this outer edge here, but you don't want to lose that radiating pattern that you see on the iris. And that is what that looks like. And then depending on how the light is hitting it, you might have some areas that are a little bit lighter. So like this area, since up here there might be a little bit of a shadow from the eyelids, this part here might be a little bit lighter. So you can just use an eraser to make it a little bit lighter. Essentially that's it. So light shadows on the sclera or the eyeball itself, especially where it's going into the skull. Then a radiating pattern on the iris, everything going towards the center with this darkish ring on the outer edge of the iris. And then the pupil really, really dark. And the catch light is the brightest area. Okay. So what we want to do on this one here is you want to practice doing this stuff on your own, the whole thing. So I'm just going to show you the diagram, and then you can shade it on your own. On this one here, we're going to take a look at a side view, okay? Because remember, the side view is different than the frontal view. And then on this one here, we'll take a look at a 3/4 view. So let's look at this one right here. To do a front view, freehand, start off with a circle. Then, what I typically do is I will draw a very faint line vertically and horizontally, and I want to try to get that on the center of the circle. Then what I want to do is I'm going to try to draw this circle half the size of this one. So I'm going to kind of like estimate, and you guys all know how to draw circles. So when you're drawing freehand, remember, don't try to draw one line, but use multiple lines and try to get that circle just right. You can always erase the stuff later. And so that's pretty good there. And then where the two lines meet here, that's where you're going to put the pupil. Again, try to make sure that it's centered on the iris. That's why we draw these cross lines to help us. So it's going to look kind of like a target when you draw it. Okay. Make sure it looks good before you move on to the next section. And then once you're satisfied with the layout, then you basically shade it just like you did that first one. Okay? So go ahead and do the rest of this on your own. Once you're done with that, we're going to move over here to the side view. Okay? Remember that when we look at the eyeball from a side, this is no longer going to look like a perfect circle. It's going to look like an oval. Okay? It's still half the size of the sphere. Okay? That doesn't change. What changes is the angle. So when I'm drawing the side view, I'm going to estimate like here, how far is it from here and how far is it from here. So it's probably going to be about here on here, here. And then I'm going to draw the oval. Okay, remember that this first oval is the iris. Try to get it so that everything's curving. There's no straight lines on it. So it's curving the whole time. It's just a softer curve than this one, which is a more aggressive curve. And then you gotta get the pupil centered on that. Okay, the pupil will also look like an oval. It's just smaller, but it has to be centered on the iris. Okay, so it should look something like that. The rest of it stays the same. So the pupil is dark. The iris has that outer ring, and it has this radiating pattern. And I'm doing this quickly. You guys, when you do this, take your time. Decide where the light's coming from so that you can figure out where your catch light is going to be. And I didn't do that, so I'm going to have to use an eraser to pull that off. Now keep in mind that from a side view, you would also have this piece here that looks like a lens, like a contact lens, which is clear. Make sure that when you are putting in the iris and the pupil, make sure that you put the pupil on the iris and not on this area right here. Okay, otherwise it'll look strange. So let's say my light source is coming from this side, then my catch light would probably be in this area right here. So I should have done the layout first, but it would be in that area right there, which means that this area here would be where my shadows are. And remember that you have to curve your shadows because you're working with a sphere. So don't go up and down or straight across. You have to curve it. And then if you want to smooth it out, use your blending stump or a paper towel or something to smooth out that ball. Now we're not going to get into all of the little veins and all of that. I just want to make sure that you guys understand that you are working with a sphere and not a circle. So you have to make sure that you curve those shadows, figure out where your highlight is, so it'll look kind of like that. Later on the next session, when we start learning how to put the skin on, you're not going to see a lot of this, okay? But you want to feel like you can see it underneath. So that would be a side view of the eye. Okay. The last view that we're going to look at is the 3/4 view. So this is a front view, so it's looking straight at you. This is a side view. So 3/4 is anything that doesn't fit in those two categories. Keep in mind that if you're looking at a person, our eye has limited range. So the eye can look up, it can look down, it could look left, it could look right, and it could do diagonals. That's it. It's got a limited range. Anything further than that, you have to move your entire head. So if I was drawing the eye and I wanted to do something like that, so you'll notice that this is an oval, but it's a much wider oval than the side view. Okay, so let's see how that looks on paper. The big thing to remember is that everything's going to pivot from this center line. So imagine that this is the center, and you want it to look either up to the left, up to the right, this way, or whatever direction you want. So let's say that I want to make it look like it's going this way. What I want to do is I want to draw a line in the direction that I want the eye to look, and then I want to draw a perpendicular line at a 90 degree. Okay, that is the angle that I want the oval to look. Okay, make sure that it's perpendicular. Don't do some weird angle, because that throws everything off. So now I can start putting in my oval. I still want to keep that oval the same size as before, so about half the size of the sphere. Okay, half the size of the height of the sphere. But because it's in perspective, you'll notice that it's not going to be a perfect circle. It has to be a sphere. So I'm kind of building this up a little bit until I get it just right. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And then I have to make sure that I put the pupil in the center. So the center would be here, and again this would be an oval now because it's not a straight on view, but it's going to be wider than the side view, much wider, kind of like that. Okay, and now the process of shading is pretty much the same. So let's say that the light's coming this time from this side, so I'm going to say that the catch light is going to be here and my shadows are going to be on this side. So let's go ahead and start with the pupil. This time I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I leave my catch light open. I'm going to keep these lines to help me, and I'm actually going to add even more to help me with that radiating pattern. And then I'm just going to start working it towards the center. And if you need to, spin the paper. I am always spinning the paper. Sometimes I forget to do that on camera because I'm trying to make sure that I keep the paper on the frame or in the frame. But when I'm drawing without a camera, I'm constantly moving my paper around just to make it easier on myself. right here where the catch light is, there's going to be a little bit back here and a little bit here. Right there. Clean up this edge, put in that nice darkish ring, making sure that it stays an oval. The rule of perspective says this side is closer to me, so this side is going to look a little bit bigger than that side. That means that this line that I'm putting right here is going to be just a little bit thicker than the line in the back. Right? And then the shadow is on this side. It might be a little bit there, but the catch light on the white part is actually going to be right in this area here. And remember, this shadow is relatively soft. We're not going to go to a full value scale where we're going from pure white to pure black. And then you can soften it depending on your style. Sometimes when I draw eyes, I actually leave these marks. But if you're trying to make them look like photorealistic, then you want to smooth some of this out. So I will for this little exercise. If you accidentally lost a highlight, if you went too dark, just get an eraser and soften it back in. A lot of students, for whatever reason, are afraid to draw with an eraser, but I use it as a drawing tool all the time. So like right here, I want to get this brighter. So I'm actually going to use my eraser and brighten that up a little bit, and I'm going to leave it. Okay. Make that nice and bright. And just clean it up a little bit. So there you have it. Those are the three most common views for the eyeball. So you have the frontal view, which is looking straight ahead. The biggest thing here is making sure that you give the sphere, the eyeball, that sense that it's three-dimensional. Okay, this will remain a perfect circle. This will remain a perfect circle. Make sure that this circle is half the size of this circle here, and then this one can vary depending on how much is dilating. On this one here, side view, remember that you're still looking at half the size of this overall circle, but you're looking at an angle. So now this becomes an oval. And in fact, I probably could have made that even skinnier to really push the idea that I'm looking at it from the side. And then the 3/4 view falls somewhere in the middle. And that depends on the angle that you want. The big thing here, make sure that you start in the middle. Draw a line to the direction where you want the iris to be. Draw a perpendicular line so that this is perpendicular to the center. Okay, and that's it. On the next session, we're going to go into how to draw the features of the eyes, such as the eyelids and the tear ducts and all of that. Okay, thanks for watching.